Hey friends, today we're going to talk about dopamine. What is it exactly? How does it work? Why does your motivation and drive to achieve things depend on it so much? Why can you play video games for hours, but after 30 minutes with a textbook you start nodding off? Why don't you get any satisfaction from work, but you can scroll through your phone from morning till night? And at the very end, I'm going to teach you a little trick that'll help you work more productively and actually get dopamine from things you don't even enjoy. That's just how life works. It's a law you have to accept and make peace with. There's no way around it. Your body doesn't want to do things that don't bring it pleasure. And the equivalent of pleasure for your body is the release of dopamine. Someone invites you fishing, someone invites you to a gaming cafe, you eat your favorite cake, and you get pleasure. And that pleasure, that's dopamine right there. Dopamine is responsible for thinking. It's released in two places in the brain. One type of dopamine is released and handles thinking, while the second handles movement. There's a terrible disease called Parkinson's disease. What happens? Right. The person becomes disoriented, unable to function properly. That's one example of what happens when dopamine regulation gets disrupted. Dopamine is responsible for addiction, for drive, for the desire to achieve, for the desire to win, for the desire to get up right now and go do something. A lot of you are sitting on your couch right now and you realize that 12, 15 years ago, when your friends called you somewhere, you drop everything and just run. You didn't think about why or what for. You just wanted that action, that hustle. Now you're 28, 35, 42 years old, maybe older, maybe younger. You've gotten heavy. You've become hard to get moving. You don't want anything. You constantly have to force yourself to do things. Get your butt off the couch and put in a little effort. Why am I bringing this up? A lot of people ask me, how do you get so much done? Where do you find the motivation and energy for all of it? It's simple. My dopamine system is working well. A person with normal time perception, with normal awareness of the world around them, with normal motivation, and not just the wanting kind of motivation, but the get up, go and do it kind. That's a person with healthy dopamine levels and good dopamine sensitivity. But what happens when there's not enough dopamine? Well, simple example probably. You're sitting there playing video games for 3-4 hours and dopamine is being released in response. You killed someone, shot someone, won something. Dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. You feel good. And you develop a dependency. So when people talk about video game addiction and some people think it's made up, no, it's not made up. There's addiction to social media, to your phone. When you pick up your phone and constantly want to check some message, read some notification, see some new post on Instagram or TikTok that'll help you release dopamine, and you can get stuck scrolling, watching reels for 2-3 hours, watching complete garbage, junk food for your brain. But meanwhile, you've got an exam tomorrow, you pick up a book, and within 30 minutes, you're falling asleep. You've got no dopamine. A lot of people say, well, doesn't the body understand that I need this, that it's useful for me, that it benefits me? No, it doesn't work that way. Simple example, drugs, drug addicts, they understand perfectly well that it's harmful. They understand perfectly well that it's killing them. But the body will still try to make you get more and more and more of the drug. And we're not just talking about marijuana or cocaine or any drugs in general. Energy drinks are stimulants too. Caffeine is also a stimulant. Now you might ask, can dopamine sensitivity get dulled if you constantly stimulate it with games and coffee? Does it become less sensitive? Yes. Drug addicts who've been on drugs for a long time, they become accustomed to high doses of dopamine. For them, the so-called baseline, the level at which they exist, is positioned very high. And ordinary things like meeting up with your girlfriend or going to see a movie no longer provide the pleasure they want. That's why they don't want anything besides drugs and regular activities. Just look at addicts who've been on heavy drugs for a long time. They're amorphous. They don't like moving. They don't like doing anything. They don't need anything except drugs, because that's how it works. If the body doesn't get dopamine from something, it won't want to do that thing. When a man doesn't have enough testosterone, his dopamine regulation gets disrupted. That's why a man with low testosterone doesn't want anything. He's heavy, sluggish, which is why he first needs to fix his testosterone levels. Yes, testosterone and dopamine, they work synergistically. Low testosterone causes problems with dopamine, and low dopamine will cause problems with testosterone. Dopamine is very greedy and sneaky. Actually, not dopamine, our brain. There's short-term reward and long-term reward. Simple example, I go and eat a cake. Immediately tasty, immediately sweet, dopamine release. The body understands, aha, you eat cake. Even though it's unhealthy, whatever, you get pleasure. You get an immediate reward. Now, second example, you need to get a job. You need to pass some interview. If you land it, in the long run, you've got a salary, stable employment, career growth. But in the current moment, from sitting there preparing, you don't get dopamine. From knowledge appearing in your head, you don't get dopamine. And because getting that dopamine is delayed, unfortunately, the body doesn't want to make you get up and feel motivated to move. By the way, the most dopamine is released when things happen suddenly. Simple example, you're the head of some major corporation. You've got a multi-billion-dollar deal you've been working toward for years. But when it happens, when the big money comes in, you're very calm because it was expected, it was planned out, it was emotionally already processed. And you don't get pleasure. That's why a lot of wealthy people don't enjoy the rich life the way any ordinary working guy would if he suddenly found himself in a millionaire's shoes for a week. And you're surprised. How can that be? He's got yachts, he's got planes, he's got women, but it doesn't bring him pleasure anymore because the dopamine he's used to is already at a completely different level. And so people who have everything in life stop getting pleasure from ordinary things. All of this becomes routine for them, and they need more dopamine. And that's why alcohol, that's why drugs, addictions, it's all a consequence of constantly having large dopamine releases. And by the way, the same thing happens with watching pornography. You constantly get cheap, easy dopamine, and ordinary things. Your ordinary life start becoming harder for you. You like examples? Dopamine, complicated name, but I'll try to explain simply how it works. There's an experiment with mice. They took a mouse, connected electrodes to its brain, and gave it the ability to press a pedal. When it pressed, it would get stimulation to the brain, pleasure. Dopamine would be produced. And what do you think? There was food nearby, water, good conditions. The mouse kept pressing, got pleasure, and the pleasure overrode all its basic needs. It didn't need food, it didn't need water, it didn't need sleep. All it did was press, and the desire to get dopamine, to get pleasure, overpowered, no, not overpowered, outweighed natural basic instincts, self-preservation, procreation, and the mice died. They died from overstimulating themselves. Nothing else mattered to them. Interesting, right? Now, second experiment, they took another group of mice and destroyed the area in their brain responsible for releasing dopamine. What do you think happened? Did the mouse run around and eat since it was focused? No, it lay motionless and did nothing because without dopamine, you have no movement. You have no motivation to get up and do anything. Despite the fact that you're hungry, it's specifically dopamine that makes you get up and obtain that food. And here's what's interesting. If they put a piece of sugar or any other food in this mouse's mouth, it would happily chew and eat that sugar. The issue was motivation. The motivation simply became zero. If you're more drawn to something, it means you get more pleasure from it. And when children, for example, choose some sport or some activity or want to do something, it's only because they want to get dopamine. If you understand this manipulation and reward system in raising children, it'll be easier for you to raise your kids. Some of you, as soon as I started talking about drugs, are probably thinking, well, I don't do drugs, I'm fine. Dopamine and the amount released doesn't depend on what it's released from. Here's an example for you. A person has yachts, planes, a billionaire. Suddenly he crashes in the desert. He walks for 2 days completely burnt, exhausted, ready to give half his fortune for a sip of water. They give him a liter of water. The amount of dopamine he gets from drinking that water will exceed the amount of dopamine he got in a whole year buying expensive sports cars, meeting the most beautiful women in the world, satisfying what he thought were his needs from a simple bottle of water. I can confirm this too, actually, because I remember when I was preparing for fitness competitions, I was dieting extremely hard, was dehydrated. That feeling from water, it's just indescribable. You know, you can easily not eat. You can deny yourself anything. But when you don't drink for several days and you're dehydrated on top of that, water is just, I mean, really, I was ready to give anything just to be allowed to drink. Even plain water can cause a huge, gigantic release of dopamine. And you don't need to always associate dopamine with drugs and addictions. This is a simple example that any action in our life requires dopamine. Here's another fact, actually. The most intense dopamine release happens. I mentioned the person with billion-dollar deals, but if that same person wins at gambling, why are people addicted to gambling? They need dopamine. I'll never promote betting companies or casinos because they cause gambling addiction. That's one type of dependency. It's ludomania. You're addicted to the desire to win and suddenly get dopamine. It's a form of addiction. Whatever doesn't give you dopamine quickly and easily, your body doesn't like. That's why long-term things always push you away. Plus, if you're constantly getting dopamine, you're on stimulants, you're constantly watching movies, you're scrolling through social media feeds, you're constantly on your phone, constantly communicating with people, you're playing video games. All of this raises your dopamine level and you get depleted. Ordinary things stop interesting you. It gets harder and harder to find motivation for work, for studying, for your projects, especially if you're also overdoing it with pornography. And it's very important to know how to break out of this vicious cycle. To even out your dopamine receptors and dopamine sensitivity, there's a detox method. Detox, dopamine detox. It's done very simply, once a week. Every month, that's 4 times a month, you turn off your smartphone if possible. You don't watch movies. You don't listen to music. You don't play video games. Boring, right? That's the point. We're all trying to avoid boredom. And when we lie around doing nothing or just talk with friends, go for a walk outside, read a book. We all say it's incredibly boring. But that feeling of boredom is exactly what you need to catch. The feeling of boredom and the absence of external stimulants. Then everything will be fine. It's hard, much harder than you think, but that's exactly what needs to be done. And of course, get rid of excessive stimulants in the form of caffeine, pornography, eliminate it, minimize it in your life. And third, alcohol and all that junk food. On those days when you're doing your detox, try to eat as clean and healthy as possible. No junk food, because that's also easy dopamine release. You might ask, should this detox be done alone, going off into the woods or a cabin, or with family, meeting someone? You know, there's this practice, I won't name it, where people go to a retreat. It's in the mountains of Colorado. There are no phones there, no music. You don't even talk. You just meditate. I haven't tried it myself, but I know people who had this dopamine problem and went through this practice. It's one approach. I'm not advocating for something that extreme. In my lifestyle, it's impossible. But 1 day a week, leaving calls only for emergencies from mom, grandma. You can make an exceptions list. Yes, and this is done specifically so you get out of this dopamine intoxication. When your dopamine baseline is high and you need to lower it a bit, remove stimulation so that receptors get cleared, so they become more sensitive, so that simple tasks that are just necessary for you become easier. Because otherwise everything is through gritted teeth, everything is through I can't, everything is through I don't want to. And often Why is addiction, like drug addiction, alcoholism, like a snowball, one thing pulls another behind it? Where there are drugs, there's gambling. Where there's gambling, there are all these addictions. Porn addiction, sex addiction. It's all a consequence. We're chasing dopamine. That's just how nature set it up, unfortunately. Let's look at what foods and how they can affect us. And let's also look at what supplements you can use to increase dopamine. First, chocolate. I actually love it. Raises baseline dopamine by 1.5 times. Sex, and not just sex itself, but the pursuit of sex, that also raises dopamine levels. Raises it by 2 times from baseline. Nicotine. I'm not advocating for it, but that's exactly why smokers are so attached to cigarettes, because it raises dopamine 2.5 times, but very briefly. That's why when there's stress, when there's anxiety, out of old habit, even if they've quit, they get the urge to smoke. Cocaine, 2.5 times, and amphetamine, 10 times. Can you imagine? Some of the hardest addicts are amphetamine users. And when they come down off amphetamine, they don't want anything at all. They just lie there like half corpses. The whole world is gray, colorless, soundless. So chocolate is half a stimulant too, technically. You see, also a dopamine stimulant. So the less of all this, the better. Because you go above the baseline, and you drag that baseline up with you. It gets elevated. Here's a cigarette, here's coffee, here's loud music. Intense exercise, so you're always on a high, but you burn out. There's even such a thing as burnout, professional burnout even. You're constantly on operations, especially we surgeons, and then you just realize, okay, vacation urgently, emergency vacation, because you're just sitting watching a movie and you're not interested. You don't want to go anywhere, don't want to do anything. That's why surgeons often, drink. They often, smoke. And by the way, that's one of the reasons surgeons can't quit their profession, because they're dopamine addicts. And if this is your calling, you work through it, get dopamine, and that's why no matter how hard it is, it's hard to quit. But at the same time, ordinary activities don't bring you pleasure. Let's think about what supplements can still help us boost dopamine production. Velvet bean, it contains L-Dopa, which is a dopamine precursor. Its other name is Mucuna pruriens. If you haven't heard of that one, you've probably heard of the second supplement. It's L-tyrosine. It's also an amino acid precursor to L-Dopa. Third, PEA, which is phenylethylamine. It raises dopamine levels. And lastly, what you should know, what lowers it. Because very often guys come to me and say they've gotten lazy, and I ask them, what are you taking? And they say they're taking melatonin. If you don't actually have a real need for melatonin, taking it wrecks your dopamine. Now you might think, if increasing dopamine is so bad, why all these supplements? Why is any of this needed? Should you just cut it all out of your life and your baseline will rise, or no? It's important that the body can release dopamine on one hand, and also that the body stays sensitive to it, because you got used to this level of dopamine due to whatever addictions you have, for example. And the dopamine that gets released when someone invites you to the movies or when you need to write a dissertation, that amount isn't enough. It's important to be able to release dopamine while not having your baseline up in the clouds, because you're constantly stimulated. So balance is needed. We're always striving to accelerate, always striving for more, piling more tasks on ourselves, more responsibilities. But everything around starts suffering. Our social life, our relationships, this is everywhere. That's why a businessman becomes cold, because indirectly through oxytocin, communication in the workplace gets disrupted. Communication with a spouse, he doesn't want to hug, doesn't want to kiss, doesn't want to have sex. Everyone focuses only on testosterone. Testosterone, you can throw prolactin in there too, but dopamine, it all works in synergy. One strengthens another and one weakens another. Its levels and sensitivity are very important. One study showed that the dopamine levels released during gaming correspond to the same brain areas as in drug addicts. So when people talk about gaming addiction, it definitely exists. It's not something made up just to demonize video games. It's real. Why am I leading to this? Because we're all used to thinking that addiction is only drugs. And I'd like you to share with me what addictions you have, because we're all addicted to different things. Someone's addicted to music, someone's addicted to the gym, someone's addicted to sex. And our lives often suffer greatly because of this, because balance is needed. Share stories down below about what addictions have been ruining your life and how it changed after they entered your life. And most importantly, how you broke free from that addiction, because people reading about the same problem you had might be able to break out of that vicious cycle thanks to your advice. And now I'm going to tell you how to trick your body, how to hack it to make it get dopamine where there actually isn't much. Imagine you're playing a video game again. You're getting dopamine. You need to study or go to the gym, especially if you're not used to it. You don't get dopamine right away. And naturally, the body doesn't want to do this. The trick is actually very simple. You have to finish the activity you actually need to do with a dopamine release. How do you do that? Reward, eat something tasty, or play a video game. If this reward follows what you actually need to do, your body will stop feeling displeasure and aversion toward the process itself. Your workouts will start bringing more pleasure. Exercising will come easier to you. Studying will come easier to you. If you can study for 3 hours and then immediately sit down and play a video game, the body, from the anticipation, understanding that there'll be dopamine at the end, will start loving the process you're engaged in right now, even though dopamine isn't directly being released from it. Simple example from a buddy of mine. He says he had this absolutely favorite protein shake that he wouldn't allow himself, wouldn't allow it, and he was following a pretty strict diet. And he hated CrossFit. But he went to it because he made himself a promise that after CrossFit, as soon as he went to the class, he'd drink his shake. And that craving, that love for the protein shake, it brought love for the sport. It actually helped him love CrossFit and get pleasure from it. And then once the body started associating you work out, there'll be dopamine at the end. He started enjoying the workouts. Also, something I'd like to end with. One study checked dopamine levels after drinking alcohol. People who thought they were drinking alcohol, but it was actually water, also had elevated dopamine. Dopamine also increases when you spend time with people who are pleasant to you, people you love, people you miss, and even when you just look at photos of smiling or happy people, your dopamine levels rise. It even increases when someone simply praises you for work you've done. That's why it's so important when we get approval from our colleagues, from our parents, from our friends. That's why it's so important to spend your dopamine on people and get it from people who are dear to you, not on video games, not on addictions and dependencies. Thanks for reading, and I hope this helps you understand your brain a little better.